All right, today is the second day of our week-long launch for my new book, The Musical Realm, Look to the Light and Listen to the Music Within. I can't wait to have you read this book. Let me quickly double-check the settings, make sure everything looks okay on our various sites with the sound and the audio. Let me just check on YouTube for a second. I'll go to that one to start with. That is looking great. Okay, sounds good. Perfect. So today I'm going to read chapter 2 from my book, The Musical Realm. So this starts on page 22. Remember, Matthew has been sucked into the musical score. And let me read what happens as Matthew is in the musical score. Chapter 2. This is from my book, The Musical Realm. This is chapter 2, The Adventure Awaits, is what this chapter is titled. Everything hurt all over. Matthew reached up and felt what must have been a goose egg on the back of his head. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious, but it must have been quite a while, because he felt groggy and fuzzy-brained. The last thing he could remember was an out-of-body experience, like he was floating in air or falling, or both. He couldn't exactly remember. Matthew quickly sat up from the unforgiving forest floor and gasped. I was sucked inside a musical score. He remembered what had happened. He remembered everything. Matthew quickly began rubbing his eyes with his right hand while using his left hand to make sure he hadn't broken any bones. He did have a few scrapes on his arms, but other than that, everything seemed okay. His denim jeans had ripped a little near his ankles, and his once off-white t-shirt was completely dirty, with brown and green stains all over. He must have gone through some sort of dust cloud before he hit the forest floor. Because Matthew was covered in a lot of brownish, powdery dust, Matthew couldn't tell if it was a sand or some earthy form of glitter, because it sparkled when the sun's rays hit it at just the right angle. It sounds bizarre, but he was also covered in a strange residue of something that looked like the dandelion seeds little children like to blow on, often pretending they are fairies. In fact, it was acting like a cushioned foam padding beneath Matthew and was scattered a few feet in every direction surrounding him. What was the last thing Mr. Darius said to me? Matthew was questioning himself, not really speaking to anyone at all since he was alone. While remaining in a somewhat seated and crouched position, Matthew looked around at the unbelievable scenery surrounding him. He had never seen anything like this before, not even in his many fantasy picture books that had been hand-drawn or even photoshopped with ethereal images on them. There was so much greenery everywhere. Tall, beautiful, and majestic towering trees shaded him from the intense heat. Thousands of exquisite flowers and small flowering trees and colorful bushes seemed to be almost painted into this picture-perfect setting. Matthew couldn't even put into words how beautiful everything was. To his left, there was a breathtaking waterfall that must have been 500 or more feet high. All along the sides of the waterfall, almost pinned up as drapery beside the cascading turquoise blue water, were fantasy-like flowers and multicolored plants, each one beautifully and artfully attached to the rocky cliffs. The somewhat rocky ground around Matthew was covered with a gentle moss that felt like satin or silk, and appeared to be vibrant hues of greens, blues, and even magenta. It was everywhere, and could even be seen on the walls of the deep red rock cliffs. Right in front of Matthew, there seemed to be an open meadow with a large lake and smaller natural-made fountains all around. They almost looked like little geysers, but they shot out water in a mist-like formation, almost as if they were automated. As they did so, beautiful light beams lit up the surrounding rock formations. The rock formations seemed like natural works of art. They almost appeared to be pre-thought-out statues or creations, even though you could tell they were not man-made at all. There were colors Matthew had never seen before and could not even describe. There were strange but sublime fruit trees and bushes everywhere that accentuated the greenery of the forest and displayed their tantalizing fruit on low-hanging branches. Some were even clumped in mounds of beautifully shaped fruit bushes. Thousands of bright, colorful birds flew in the sky. It seemed like something from a tropical paradise or the Amazon jungle. The only thing that even came close to this was Mr. Darius's estate, but even that could not compare with this landscape. Looking over Matthew's shoulder, he saw multiple rainbows in the sky and a never-ending beach behind him, with an ocean that sparkled and even seemed to have yellow and pink hues that accentuated and highlighted everything as the waves crashed onto the glass-like ocean shore. The sand glistened and shimmered, as if it were crushed up pieces of china dishes or little crystals and gemstones gleaming and sparkling in the sun. Matthew had never seen anything like this and couldn't even imagine dreaming of a destination so magical and awe-inspiring. There were a few unfamiliar animal sounds in the distance, but they sounded so majestic and powerful. Off in the far distance in front of him, beyond an open emerald meadow and a lovely turquoise blue lake, Matthew could see an imposing structure. It appeared to be entirely made of gold, because it glinted and shined. It seemed to be a shimmering city entirely made of gold or some material that appeared to be golden. There were castles and towers, large cathedrals, and massive and majestic monuments everywhere. Tall statues lined the streets from the end of the lake extending all the way to the city gates. It was absolutely breathtaking and unbelievable. Matthew grew up reading fantasy novels and comic books, and even followed quite a few fantasy artists who created fantasy worlds for various board games, video games, and movies that Matthew loved. But this world before him defied all explanation and was even more picturesque than anything Matthew had seen or could possibly imagine. All of a sudden, a cracking noise behind Matthew startled him. He awkwardly stumbled to his feet, but instantly tripped over a tree vine and fell to his knees. Placing his dirty hands on the ground, Matthew was about to stand up when he heard a group of people behind him whispering and laughing. "Behold, this foreigner frolics as a canine on all fours. He's barbaric at best and a commoner of the lowest order. He acts like a feral feline," bellowed a commanding voice. Matthew looked up, while still on all fours, and noticed he was now surrounded on all sides by what looked like a small army of 8 soldiers. They actually looked more like medieval knights, covered from head to toe in gold and silver armor. But you could see their faces. The knight's armor wasn't bulky or chunky. It was very form-fitting. No one said anything as Matthew slowly stood up, but as he did so, the knights all drew their swords from their golden sheaths and firmly clutched their large and impressively decorated golden, burgundy, and silver shields. "Who art thou? How camest thou into this region, and what dost thou desire? What seekest thou?" asked one of the knights. What appeared to be the leader of the knights stepped forward and pointed his long golden sword at Matthew's throat. The rest of the knights stepped forward as well, and their drawn swords were also pointed at Matthew, but their swords were silver and not as ornately decorated. "Who am I? Who are you? What is this place?" asked Matthew unsurely. Matthew was confused and understandably scared as he nervously looked at the 8 knights. "We are known as the 8th Infantry and serve under the quarter commanders, 4 of the bravest warriors who protect this land encompassing the 4 corners of our realm. At first we thought thou to be one of their half-hounds. We are returning to meet with the Grand Staff to report on our recent quest, replied the leader of the knights as he moved his golden sword in a circular motion in front of Matthew. "The 8th Infantry? What are quarter commanders and half-hounds?" questioned Matthew quietly. He didn't understand anything. Everything was so confusing and didn't even make sense. What was this place? Why was Matthew here? Why art thou in these forests? Is this a trap? Look at these strange vestments, yelled the leader of the knights. The leader or captain of this 8th Infantry motioned his golden sword from Matthew's head to his toes as he analyzed what Matthew was wearing. You mean my clothes? Asked Matthew fearfully. I'm just wearing jeans and a t-shirt and a pair of really old tennis shoes. Matthew did look very strange and out of place, especially when surrounded by so many fierce knights. Thy speech doth betray thee. Thou art engaged in espionage, a treasonous and treacherous tyranny. Bind him in shackles, and we shall carry the scoundrel to the grand staff, barked the leader. Honor and devotion, life or death, we serve the grand staff with every breath, screamed one of the other knights out loud. All at once, all of the members of the 8th Infantry knelt on one knee while surrounding Matthew, bowed their heads reverently and somewhat ceremoniously, while clutching their swords to their breastplate, and in unison repeated, Honor and devotion, life or death, we serve the grand staff with every breath. Matthew had seen similar practices in old movies about knights or secret societies and organizations, but he had never experienced anything like this in his life. He stood at the center of the night circle and was motionless and tongue-tied as he watched the 8th Infantry recite this theme or motto, or possibly their undying allegiance to this strange grand staff. Matthew was even more confused than before. What or who was the grand staff? Arising in unison, the knights came forward, and 3 of the knights hoisted Matthew up in the air on his back as if he were being suspended in the sky. 2 other knights grabbed some sort of thick tree vines and tightly wrapped them around Matthew's ankles, then tied his arms and wrists together. After doing so, they then began walking toward the castle with Matthew on their shoulders. At first, Matthew squirmed and struggled to break free, but after a few failed attempts to wiggle away, he gave up and remained motionless. All Matthew could do was look at the sky and watch the clouds pass by. They seemed to move across the sky very swiftly in this new land, almost as if they were hurrying on their way and had somewhere important to go. The sky seemed to come alive for Matthew, much like a bustling and very busy big city. But all he could do was look to the sky and hope he'd be okay. This day had turned out much differently than Matthew ever thought it would. Hours went by and the sun in the sky began to set. Matthew's legs had fallen asleep and his arms felt numb. Trying to keep somewhat active, Matthew tried to tap his fingers against his legs. It was somewhat of a bad habit he had developed when he was younger and couldn't sit still in school. His teachers all said he had ADD, attention deficit disorder, or some other problems. But Matthew's dad said it was because he was ambitious and a doer who needed to constantly be doing something important. He referred to it as Matthew's moments of greatness. At this point, he needed to do something to distract his mind and stop worrying about what was going to happen. Matthew's dad was somewhat of a motivational speaker, and he always tried to drill into Matthew's mind that he must not worry about things over which he had no control. If he could control it, then he could do something about it. Every problem has a solution, Matthew, Dad would frequently say. You just need to solve the problem, and if there is no readily available solution, then you shouldn't worry about the problem. Either work the problem out or let the problem work itself out. That is always your answer. Don't ever let worry weigh you down, Matthew. This is what Matthew's dad often told him he should do. The fact that Matthew had memorized what his dad said to him is an indication of how often he would say it. Except for a few repeated jabs in his back from some of the knights who wanted to keep Matthew awake during the long trek, the trip back to the castle, though exceptionally long, was not entirely unbearable. All along the way, beautiful exotic birds flew overhead and whistled or sang sweet melodies. Matthew felt they were singing personally for him, and even knew what was happening. These birds were somehow beckoning to Matthew and encouraging him that everything would somehow be okay. It brought genuine feelings of gratitude and intense peace in what should have been a nightmarish experience. But Matthew felt fine about these nights. They all seemed to have character, purpose, dignity, and were bound by a sacred brotherhood of some sort. It may have been an oath, a covenant, motto, theme, or lifestyle, but it did not take long to see that these nights were noble. Matthew couldn't quite put his thoughts together, but he felt protected by these knights of nobility, even though they had bound him and were carrying him off to the castle. As darkness crept over the land, the lead knight and two other knights beside him lit torches along the way. It was almost a procession, and Matthew felt like they were carrying him off as a trophy of some sort and wanted to display Matthew to the members of the castle. It was almost as if he were some creature, some strange creature or wild beast they had captured, not wanting to harm him, but hoping to protect and preserve him. They carried Matthew cautiously and carefully. They were very tender and gentle, even though they were strong and intimidating knights. Near midnight, as best as Matthew could tell, they approached the long path that led to the entrance leading up to the castle drawbridge. There were enormous golden statues lining the paved cobblestone path. Many appeared to be towering figures, knights of nobility, or kings and queens of some degree or prominence from years past. There were additional statues of what must have been gods and goddesses, angels, fairies, and the likes of mystical or magical creatures. Each statue appeared to be so realistic, they seemed more lifelike than most mortals, and somehow even appeared to be more than marble or golden statues. These noble tributes seemed to be real live knights and angels, but were eternally transfixed as statues. They must have been a reminder to embolden and empower everyone who walked beneath their figures to do more and be more, by remembering the great heritage the people of this castle held so dear to their hearts. You could feel the reverence and honor these 8 knights felt for these statues. Everyone walked on in silence and embraced their solitude. Matthew turned his head a little to the left and noticed a tear falling down the cheek of one of the larger and more intimidating knights as he walked beneath these monuments. As the knights reached the drawbridge, one younger and somewhat shorter knight took out a long curled ram's horn from his leather bag and blew into it as forcefully as if he were playing a saxophone in the junior high jazz band. The sound was deceptively beautiful, although the ram's horn only produced a very low, singular sound and was drone-like in its tone. It was a very low bass sound. After 10 seconds or so of blowing through the horn and ceremoniously lowering it to the knight's side, the drawbridge was at once lowered over the murky moat that surrounded this golden city. The knightly members of the 8th Infantry, carrying Matthew as their captive, walked across the beautiful metallic bridge and entered the lower quarters of the castle. After one swift knock on an old metal door on the very lower left entrance to one of the buildings directly below the castle, the butler or henchman, or whoever he was, welcomed each knight with a firm right hand grasp and warm embrace. He looked less like a knight, with the exception of his long hair and long braided beard, and was dressed more like what Matthew imagined Robin Hood or an English archer would look like. This unknown knight, or soldier, or whoever he was, did have a short dagger, or a small sword, strapped to his back, and several small daggers strapped on each arm and each leg. There were even 2 tiny knives near his ankles. The phrase, "Returned at last, this quest is past," was whispered in the right ear of each member of the 8th Infantry as they embraced this mysterious henchman. Matthew could feel their bond of brotherhood. He respected how these knights behaved and how they treated each other with such respect and kindness. They were very loyal to each other, and not only spoke with the purest of words such as thee, thou, and thine, but they were not afraid to show their emotions. They were very tender-hearted, and yet appeared absolutely fearless and foreboding. Matthew marveled at these knights. He was in awe of the journey they had taken, but he could sense the strength, fortitude, and even the heroism of these knights. Noticing Matthew, the henchman motioned to have him untied, and asked Matthew to be seated at the head of a long, ornately carved marble table. Matthew, noticing, thou must be hungered after such a long day's journey, my young squire. Please seat thyself at the head of our table and break bread with us as we thank the gods for the safe return of these noble knights, said the mysterious henchman. All of the knights surrounded the table and began eating the wonderful food placed before them. The breads, meats, and fruits at the table were divine. Matthew was starving and began eating everything placed in front of him, even if he didn't know what it was. It didn't matter. Matthew even ate a few green things that must have been some sort of vegetable or salad, something he rarely did at home. The food tasted so good and was so different from the fast food and processed food Matthew was often accustomed to eating at school or at his friends' homes. He often criticized his mother for being a health nut because she enjoyed baking and cooking and despised prepackaged foods she called fake food. The meal at this table with these knights had to be one of the best meals Matthew had ever eaten in his life. During the dinner, each of the knights introduced themselves. There was Alaric, Percival, Tristan, Galahad, Archibald, Lamorak, Azrael, and Arthur, who was the youngest and smallest knight. The henchman who had greeted each of the knights was named Morholt. He oversaw the provisions, weapons, and animals that each knight used on their various quests, as well as the training and recruiting of young squires, whom he personally taught, tutored, and trained to become knight apprentices to the actual knights of the 8th Infantry. Throughout the meal, the knights laughed and shared stories of their adventures. Lamorak spoke of searching for Bonacles, a wild, bull-like creature with long horns, from what Matthew understood. Azrael shared stories of flying through the air on the back of a fiery, black and blood-red dragon named Dracona. He said she is the fiercest flying winged creature he has ever encountered in all the lands and realms around. Archibald, one of the more stoutly knights, told of tales helping entire villages escape the attacks of a deformed giant named Grendel. Apparently, he was a troll-like human, but 3 to 4 times the size of an ordinary human. This giant was destroying forests, fields, and flocks all over the surrounding lands. Devastation and destruction were the remnants left behind the giant's path. Then Tristan, the leader of the 8th Infantry, spoke solemnly as he removed his breastplate and armor and showed a ghastly fresh wound down his entire right arm. The blood was still running down his tattered sleeve. It looked as though his arm had been attacked by a wild dog or bear. He told the other knights that he had been attacked by Amarok. As he said this, every knight became deadly silent. Amarok is one of the fiercest of the beasts, a gigantic female wolf that hunts alone, whispered Arthur to Matthew. She never allows anyone she attacks to survive, continued Arthur. He looked like he may have been 16 or 17. He was very young compared to the other knights. At that moment, Alaric quickly arose and grabbed a green plant and then wrapped it around the scar on Tristan's arm. He continued wrapping this green plant around the entire arm and then added a cloth to it before tying it up. This will comfort thee and allow the healing process to commence, said Alaric humbly. The rest of the knights bowed their heads as they each whispered, "The Comforter healeth," 3 times in a row. Percival, who was seated across the table, leaned toward Matthew and reverently said, "The Comforter healeth all who are wounded." It was odd, but this green leaf seemed to be sacred. Even how it was gently removed from the container in which it was placed and delicately applied to the knight's arm showed Matthew and everyone that this was a healing ceremony performed on one who needed healing and well-being. This was a sacred and spiritual ceremony performed on noble knights who had been injured while defending their own nobility or the lives of others. Instantly, a memory came to Matthew's mind. The year before, he had spent the summer on the farm with his grandparents. His grandfather was a certified master gardener and knew practically everything about plants, flowers, fruits, vegetables, herbs, and even a little about farm animals. Matthew had helped his grandfather create fruit tree guilds, as his grandfather had called them. Essentially, it was planting flowers, herbs, fruits, and various perennial plants around the fruit tree to create a similar effect found in nature. Everything works in harmony with nature, and each companion plant provides a purpose. The flowers would bring the bees to the fruit trees, while the garlic and yarrow would repel bad bugs like aphids and invite good bugs like ladybugs, who in turn would eat the bad bugs. The strawberries at the base would provide ground cover to shade the roots of the other plants, and Matthew's grandfather had even planted a plant he called comfrey at the base of the tree. He said it was a magical and medicinal herb. Grandpa said it was the best natural fertilizer you could use in your garden and loved that the roots went down 6 to 10 feet to help break up the soil so the fruit trees could dig deeper into the ground. Matthew even remembered his grandfather telling stories of Native Americans who would use comfrey to help heal cuts, scrapes, and even broken bones. They would wrap the green leaves around the wounded area after cleaning it and put a cloth over it. They would also grind up the leaves and mix them with something else that started with a C, calendula or something like it, to create a salve. Matthew thought. He couldn't remember much about most of the plants, but his grandfather had made such an impression about the importance of comfrey in the old world. This must be the comfrey plant, which is why the knights all whispered, "The Comforter healeth," 3 times in a row. Comfort, comfrey. It made so much sense. Comfort was given to these warriors by the comfrey plant and aided in their healing process. Matthew was silent through it all and watched on in wonder and amazement. Just then, the door down the hallway flung open and 2 darkly dressed individuals angrily stormed into the room. The ceremony was abruptly interrupted, and these 2 strangers pointed their fingers at Matthew and yelled, "Traitor," at the top of their lungs. They then ran to the head of the table and snatched up Matthew in their arms and quickly carried him away down a long and dark, unlit hallway that led to an old winding staircase. These 2 mysterious and darkly dressed strangers then descended the stairs while dragging Matthew behind them. All the while he was kicking and screaming at the top of his lungs. They somehow entered a damp and dreary dungeon in the basement of the castle. Matthew was then handed over to and carried away by a stout little man they called Molto. His name had something to do with how very large he was and also how short he was. There were no candles or lights, and the smell was absolutely awful. As Molto and Matthew descended more stairs, the smell became worse, before being thrown in a small cement prison cell. Matthew fell to the floor outside the cell and threw up. The smell was unbearable, and Matthew imagined this is what it must have smelled like in a room full of dead bodies or decomposing animals filled with maggots. It didn't help that there were actual mice and rats running on the muddy floor. You could hear people coughing, groaning, and even screaming from other neighboring prison cells. Matthew knew he was not alone in this horrible place, but he didn't find comfort in what was happening or in his surroundings. He had felt such peace at the dinner table, listening to the noble knights share their stories of their various quests and conquests. But who were these strange people? Why did the 2 dark men grab Matthew and take him away from the warm fire near the head of the dinner table? How could this be happening? Why would anyone let this happen to him? What had Mr. Darius done to him? What was going on, and why was Matthew in this despicable dungeon? So many thoughts whirled around in Matthew's mind. What was happening, and what did it all mean? After being thrown into his prison cell head first, Matthew stood up and then awkwardly collapsed against one of the blackened walls. He slowly slid to the floor as his legs gave way. All the while, Matthew was crying and praying he could return home again. All he wanted to do was go home. He wasn't a thief or a spy. He was a teen boy who desperately wanted and needed his mom and dad. After the experiences of the day and the long trek through the endless night, Matthew immediately fell asleep and dreamed of being home again. He didn't even mind the cold, unforgiving cement floor. There was mud and muck everywhere, and the awful sounds of the prisoners and the varmints. But Matthew tuned everything out and thought of home and his warm bed, how he missed his safe and simple life. Unfortunately, he did not sleep very long. The clanging and banging of nearby prison cells woke him in a panic. Matthew was sweating and quickly scrambled to curl up in the corner. The door to his prison cell flung open, and he was soon surrounded by 5 large, hairy, and beastly-looking men. The most disturbing-looking one held a tiny candle that illuminated his scruffy and scroungy appearance. His face had been scratched up, and there were scars on his cheeks and neck. His left ear looked as if it had been half eaten by a wild creature, and around his neck he wore a large golden pendant with markings that seemed like a combination of Arabic and Egyptian. Matthew couldn't tell. This particular beastly man's arms were covered in tattoos and scars that had left long, raised red marks everywhere. He was also missing 2 fingers on his right hand, the ring finger and pinky. He wore a long black cloak and smelled of fire. Even his hair and clothes reeked of smoke. Get him, boys. We'll take credit for this thief and present him to the grand staff ourselves. We deserve a little respect and recompense. Put him in the bag and we'll make sure he's placed within the palace walls. We deserve this. Our time has come. Now get him, yelled the man in the long black cloak. And with that, Matthew was snatched up, loaded in an old itchy wool bag, and carried away, not knowing who these men were or where they were taking him. All he could hear were footsteps and promises of revenge for wrongs not done. These hairy men kept repeating a phrase to each other. After tonight, the kingdom will be ours. No one knows what's coming, and everything is about to change. Everything is going as planned. Now, that is the 2nd chapter in my book, The Musical Realm. Can't wait to have you read this book. Tomorrow, I am going to start in with chapter 3. Every day this week, I am reading 1 chapter from the book, and I can't wait to have you read this book. Again, if you go to my website, musicmotivation.com, here's the website, musicmotivation.com. If you click on this image right here, it will take you to the page where you can learn more about the book. Right now, we are doing a daily giveaway. I'm giving away 5 to 10 free PDF copies to anyone who will share this link on their social media page, who will, if you scroll down, you can enter your email. And when you enter your email, you will get access to download the PDF book. If you click on that, you can scroll down. You can see the Kindle book is available on Amazon right here. The paperback book is available on Amazon. The hardback book is available on Amazon. But the book is also available on all sites, every platform in every format. Amazon, Apple Books, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Smashwords, Kobo, every book store you can imagine, whether it's Walmart.com or whatever it may be, you can purchase this book from every platform. Now, on this site, if you scroll down here, you can click on this image, or you can click down here where it says, you can click on this image right here, or where it says click here for the free sample PDF download, and then you'll be able to download this sample PDF book. It's the first 2 chapters from the book, chapters 1 and 2. I would love to have you download the sample book. I'd love to have you go to Amazon, go to Goodreads, leave a comment. You can read the comments that various individuals have shared, testimonials. But this week we are sharing this book, and I can't wait to have you read The Musical Realm. Again, there are 20 chapters in the book, 332 pages, but I would love to have you read The Musical Realm. This is, as it says on the back cover right here, down here it says, let me zoom in a bit for you, Teen and Young Adult Christian Fantasy. It's a teen and young adult Christian action and adventure book. So it does make reference to God. It does make reference to scriptures. It does make reference to different faith-filled and faith-promoting experiences. And so I do want you to know that. I've had some people who have complained and said, oh, this book is full of references about faith. It is. It's a teen and young adult Christian fantasy book. I did not use AI to write any portion of this book. I've had several people who have asked me, and some have said, the book sounds like it was AI. I have not used AI. I did hire a professional editor who edited this book, and so it was professionally edited by a professor up at the university, and they actually are a great editor. Wonderful. The design, this was designed by a graphic artist I have used who has actually designed all of my covers for my books, and it took her a while to design this book. She did so many different layers, and I received the PSD file, so I know and I saw how, everything was layered. And with this, because I had so many specifics I described in detail everything about what the cover should look like, even how tall each of these characters should be, what color their hair should be, who should be in the center. As you look at this is Saint Summer, this is Simon, this is Matthew, this is Preston, this is Lady Giselle, and then of course up here this is the Castle of Contentment, which you find in the book. And of course, they're learning how to look to the light and listen to the music within. The light that's in front of them. This is the sacred, this thing right here. I can't go up and down. There we go. That right there is the sacred scepter of sanctity. So this is the sacred scepter of sanctity. I can't wait to have you read The Musical Realm, look to the light, and listen to the music within. Again, this is on my website, musicmotivation.com. But you can also find the book on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. You can go to Nook, Apple Books, wherever you purchase your books. This book is available. It's available as a PDF book, a Kindle, ebook, EPUB. It's available as a paperback book. It's available as a hardback copy. In a few weeks, it will be available as an audiobook as well. So I can't wait to have you read this book. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, enter our free giveaway. Every day, we are actually giving away 5 to 10 free PDF copies of this book and 5 to 10 free PDF copies of this book all week long, every single day. And then I'm also giving away 5 free paperback versions of this book that I will mail to you for free anywhere in the United States. I would love to have you learn more about the book. But let me know if you have any questions. To enter the free giveaway, all you need to do is leave a comment below. Anyone who leaves a comment, anyone who shares this video, anyone who visits my website, again, if you go to musicmotivation.com, if you visit my website, on this page right here, and I'm going to reload the page for you so you can see, on this page, you can enter to win a free PDF copy. All you do, you can enter your email here, hit Get Access Now, and then you will have access to the free PDF copy if you are selected. I'm randomly selecting 5 to 10 people every day to receive a free PDF copy. But you can download the first 2 chapters as a sample download. But let me know what you think about the book. I'm so excited. The reviews are starting to come in, and I am loving hearing your feedback. So thank you so much. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Keep doing your best. This entire book is about learning. It's about improving. It's about progressing. It's faith-filled. It's motivational. It's inspirational. It's talking about how we can be better today than we were yesterday and striving to be even better tomorrow than we are today. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. See you. Bye.